G'day guys, AOS Coach here, and we have a special little topic, not a traditional talking video, but actually a request that's been coming up pretty frequently of late from Discord, and people have been asking me to really get into the weeds and do a masterclass video when it comes to battle tactics. So myself and Alex Tubb, the one of the top performing, everyone at the moment on the TSN network can be a top performer. It hasn't been updated for a while, but Alex is probably number one when the data eventually comes through. But Alex and I have been working quite hard behind the scenes, kind of thinking through and working out how to break down a masterclass series when it comes to battle tactics around how do we think about battle tactics? How do we build lists around battle tactics? How do we put ourselves in the best position to score 5 out of 5 every game? Deny our opponents, the resources, the tools. So really in this video, if you're someone who is either new to Age of Sigmar, trying to work out how to get through battle tactics, someone who's scoring a couple here and there and you really want to get much more consistent in scoring, or if you just want some new ideas, I think Alex and I are going to be in a good position to give you some ideas and some thoughts around how we structure and prepare and plan to make the most of the battle tactics in Age of Sigmar. But before we get into that, Alex, you want to introduce yourself? I'm going to cough for a second if it sounds like I'm struggling to talk a little. But Alex, introduce yourself. And people probably have seen you on the channel at least once, if not twice already. You talked Big War with me before. I've done so many videos, I've lost track.
Yeah. So I've been playing AOS for 3 years, coming up to now. Basically got into it during lockdown on TTS and ground away there. And then, been pretty heavily in the UK tournament scene for the last 18 months. Me and you also did that video on Nurgle when everybody said the house was the world was on fire.
That's right. Like, people were so upset with the Great Unclean One is the worst and Nurgle is the worst book in the world. Like, I remembered that. That was hilarious.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that new book worry. Mostly play Big War. I've probably had more tournament games with Big War than anybody else. Kind of been messing around with OBR and Lumineth and all kinds of stuff recently. Back in my happy place with Big War at the moment, which is a little ironic to talk about battle tactics because they're probably the army with the easiest battle tactics right now.
Yeah, but in saying that, I think we both play a group of armies, so we're well rounded in regards to we have some armies that are really easy to score out battle tactics. For me, that's Daughters of Cain. But then I've got some armies that aren't so easy, and things like Stormcast, for example, where our book battle tactics are essentially trash, and I can completely ignore them. So and then obviously in the middle is like Suns, and I've got a whole bunch of armies, and it's an interesting way to look at the game. And as you look at the General's Handbook, you look at your army. Really, it comes back to the conversation: how do I score 5 out of 5 battle tactics?
Yeah, totally. Just like relying on experience and feel for the game can only get you so far. There's a lot more kind of minutiae in terms of planning and everything else, which is often ignored by the community. Which is when you're against other like top players or players of similar level to yourself, that you're just like you just need that little bit of help to get you over the line.
Yeah, so look, let's get into it. And we did prepare some slides, and the slides really are talking points and to help bring some of the structure and the discussion to life. But I thought we'd get started and talk a little bit about why battle tactics and why is it important, Alex? Like, why as a player of Age of Sigmar 3rd edition is this important to me?
Yeah, so battle tactics have always been important for all of 3rd edition because it's 10 points of your game. It's roughly a third of your, you got it there, 38% on a lot of battle plans of your points. However, it feels like it's got even more important with this edition, or with this GHB, sorry, I should say, because there's a bit of an arms race because the GHB to battle tactics are all a little bit harder, and the book tactics are kind of now all out. We've had almost all of the new battle tomes beside Flesh Eater Courts, and most of them have like either a couple of easy ones or lots of really easy ones. So very often, if you're not scoring your 10 battle tactics or your 10 points worth of battle tactics in a game, then you're going to lose. It's quite simple. Yeah.
So maybe I'll just chunk it back slightly, okay? Yeah. So in a game of Age of Sigmar, it's all about points. I think we all know this. It's some level, there are points to score, and the person who scores the most amount of points will win the game. Makes sense. Now, in General's Handbook 2023, as we currently record, on average, battle plans, there are 28 available points to score. Now, some of them, that is not quite true. Some of them, there'll be more. Sometimes there'll be less. But on average, in most battle plans, there is 28 points to score. That would be 1, 2 more holding objectives. That would be 3. Then you would score 2 points for your battle tactic. So you times that by 5. We are looking at 25 points maximum. Add our 3 extra points for the grand strategy being scored, we are at 28 points available to us. So every round, if you're looking to win the game, and if you are attending a local tournament or a large major tournament, as you can see on the left-hand side, the ladder in your position on the ranking is often determined by the amount of points you score. So the more battle tactics and the more points overall will reward you with a higher ranking. Alex, you want to add anything to that or anything you want to clarify at this point?
No, I don't think so. I think maybe the only thing, if we talk about tournament rankings worth mentioning, is sometimes it's done like that. Sometimes it's done with like a differential. So like the difference in points between you and your opponents can also make a difference. So that, again, that's still super important. Scoring your tactics, denying their tactics, to create that differential.
Yeah, it's a really good point, because there's no one standardized way of playing at a tournament. Some tournaments may reward you for denying your opponent. Basically at its core, scoring your battle tactics is one of the keys to victory, as well as holding back your objectives and ultimately your grand strategy as well.
Yeah, totally.
The other thing I'd probably call out at this particular point, and from your experience having a bunch of armies, you might want to add to this, is that every army in the game is at a different playing field level for their battle tactics. Some, they're super easy. Some, they're super hard. Some are middle. Some, they basically don't have any because they are an older book or they just don't really work in the current season. So not everyone is on a level playing field.
Yeah, totally. I guess like talking about specific armies, like I've already mentioned Big War. Like you can write a Big War or a Soul Blight list and almost know that it's going to score 5 tactics. You almost don't have to worry about it. There's other armies, maybe something like Sylvaneth, where you need to write a list to score the 5 tactics, but it's still pretty easy. And then you might get down to some of the older books, or like something like Khorne, Stormcast, things like that, where you're going to be struggling to score 5 tactics, and so you kind of need to think, actually, like if I'm not going to regularly score 5 tactics, how am I going to get the most out of scoring, and what's my plan for if I need to beat an opponent who's going to score 5 tactics?
Yeah, and Skaven is another example where a lot of your battle tactics are locked to keywords, whether it might be, there's one battle tactic only available for Master Molder. So if you're trying to score battle tactics, you need to think about your list construction and what are either some of the units or some of the keywords you need in order to score said battle tactic.
Yeah, totally. And that, again, comes down to that list building side of it. And it's how much you want to build into it. Like, for example, again, talk about Skaven, there's the Pestilence battle tactic, which is, get 3 prayers off in a turn. That means you've got to have 3 Pestilence priests. And that's up to you to decide whether you think it's worth taking half of your potential hero slots as priests, or if you think, actually, no, I can do something else and score battle tactics elsewhere.
Yeah, and it's really interesting as well, because when you start getting under the surface of your battle tactics, whether it be what's in the General's Handbook or whether it's in your faction, you'll see there's a bullet point here, and we'll definitely elaborate this further. Some are really easy. Some can be achieved without even interacting with your opponent. Some are very hard and they are requiring a super situational thing to happen in the game that may or may not happen, or it may be particular matchups. And there are some battle tactics that usually are quite achievable, but against some opponents, they become harder or they become easier. So what we've found throughout, like in preparation and our discussion around battle tactics, is that it's almost like a traffic light where you'll find that every battle round and every opponent, that level of easy, medium, or hard will fluctuate throughout the battle. And we've got a couple of examples to share throughout the video, but I think that's what catches a lot of players off is which battle tactic do I use at the right time, but also when do I pull the trigger when the moment is there, and how do I think about things in advance as opposed to, okay, it's the start of my battle round, what do I pick?
Yeah, totally. Like, yes, from a player perspective as well, if you can have the confidence of knowing, okay, it's about round 2, this is the tactic I'm going to go for, it takes you 5 seconds, you don't have to think about it, like, that's amazing. Whereas, if I'm looking at my opponent and they're pouring through their book, going through all their cards, like scratching their head, like really like having to put a lot of thought into like how they're going to score a tactic turn 2, it's kind of like, you're struggling, like, I've got you. So even just from a facing, like how your opponent views you, just having plans, knowing how these plans might change depending on battle plans and opponents, can make a huge difference.
So we know battle tactics are important, especially if you are looking to win your games, you want to do the best at a tournament. Now, if you are new to Age of Sigmar and you're learning the game, it might be one of those features that you might put to the side as you learn the game. But as you start playing at tournaments, as you start playing the General's Handbook, it's going to be something that you need to, I don't want to say get good, but you definitely need to start thinking about how you make the most of your battle tactics.
Yeah, I think that's a really important thing to mention. Is it's a really, really deep rabbit hole. Like at its surface, like the minimum is knowing what tactics you can score, and roughly having an idea of when you might score them in the game. But you could go to the nth degree, and you could have a plan for every single other army in the game, kind of learn their tactics, learn how you're going to switch them off. Like, I'm not suggesting you do that. If you have the time, brilliant. Like, but that's for a very small subset of players to do, and there's a big sliding scale, between one end and the other.
Anything else you would say around the introduction and just, I guess, the importance of battle tactics?
No, I don't think so. I think we'll cover lots later on.
Yeah, the points that I would really reinforce at this point is that Alex and I probably don't have a plan for every battle. So when we rock up to the table, it's not like I have my battle tactics from 1 to 5 prepared in my head and it's just executing. Very much, it's like a game of chess where as the game goes, you respond to your opponent, you're moving, you're doing things. A situation will arise, you're like, oh, this is going to be good for this battle tactic. Or, oh, actually, I was hoping to score this one, but then my opponent's done something, and now this opportunity doesn't exist. So I'm not going to force this battle tactic when actually I might just hold up my sleeve for a little longer. So each game, each faction, each opponent will vary on how we think about our battle tactics.
Yeah, of course, for sure.
Cool. All right. Yeah. So we got that out. We got that clear. Let's get into a little bit around the list construction. And you were sharing a little earlier with me, Alex, some thoughts around and maybe the journey that you took around understanding and thinking a bit more strategic around your battle tactics.
Yeah, totally. So up to a few months ago, maybe like 5-6 months ago, I didn't really put much thought into battle tactics. I played a lot. Like, I probably play 3 or 4 times a week, get to a 2-day event probably once to twice a month. Like, I play a lot, but I just relied on reps and kind of like muscle memory almost, but I never like put that thought and planning into battle tactics. I was doing well. Like, I was regularly going 4-1, but just like felt like I'd almost reached like my cap. And then got kind of put onto like, planning battle tactics, and like having a plan for each battle plan and all that kind of things. And it just blew my mind. I was like, what have I been doing? These days, like, firstly in terms of list construction, which is the slide we're at, like, put a lot more thought into, rather than just, how all the synergies of a list might go together. It's also like, wow, what battle tactics am I going to score? Do I have a keyword locked battle tactic that I need to, bring a specific unit from my army to unlock that book battle tactic? Or, right, well, I need to score led into the maelstrom, which is, charge a hero and charge a unit. Well, currently I've got no heroes that I want to be getting in my, charging into my opponent. So how am I going to, allow that to work? And then it's also, so having a plan for battle tactics across a game, knowing when in the early game, for example, I'm going to want to score magical dominance. We'll talk about this later. And then, turn 5, I'll often want to score intimidate the invaders, just because of the ebb and flow of the game. And then, something like led into the maelstrom turn 3, just as super, generic examples. So, but it all starts with list construction. You need to understand, and realistically, you need to understand how you're going to score 6, 7, 8 battle tactics, not just 5. Because if turn 1 you've planned to do magical dominance, what happens when you come in against Seraphon turn 1? Game 1, where you can't score. Well, it's a massive risk going for magical dominance because Croak has board wide unbinds, and you're like, right, well, he's +1 or +2 to unbind. I've got no pluses, so chances are I'm going to be 2 points down if I go with plan A. So I need plan B.
There's a lot, really. There's a lot to unpack there, and maybe it's good, right? Because it's getting into the head of an experienced player on how they started their journey. It's not like we all just have this secret sauce and we know our battle tactics. It is a learning process, and getting ahead of the game and thinking through the ones that you are likely to score will help you before you get to the table. They often say preparation is the key to success, and it's not just rocking up to the table, looking at your army list and trying to work it out in the flow of the game. It starts at list construction, whether it is you've built your 2,000 point list and you sit there for 5 minutes and reflect, what are the battle tactics I'm most likely to score with this army list? And every season, obviously, this is going to be different, right? We were looking at some of the old battle tactics from back in the day. It was like move 3 monsters and you score your battle tactic, like ferocious advance. There was things like, have a monster on an objective and don't get it challenged by a monster. So every general's handbook, the value and the way you build your list to score battle tactics do change quite frequently. But you've got the either I've got my army and what can I score? Or it's reflecting on your army to say, right, well, I really want to score lead into the maelstrom, surround and destroy, intimidate the invaders. Do I have the tools to score them? And if not, how do I score them? Do I need to supplement in a fast unit, a cheap unit, a throwaway unit, a durable unit? And you build into the battle tactics that you think that you want to score the most.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think how much you build into that in your list depends on your army. And so you need to understand your army first and foremost, as I've already alluded to. Big war. If you build like any big war list, it's almost like, I've got 5, 6, 7 tactics that I can score without really having to interact too much with my opponent. So list building to build into some, slightly more obscure tactic, like, maybe like surround and destroy, which, puts you a little bit out on the flanks and not exactly where you want to be. It's like, why? Like, you don't need to do that. Like, that's, battle tactic number 10 when so much else has gone wrong. Whereas, if we go back to the Skaven example, every single one of their book tactics requires a keyword. So it's like, okay, well, if I don't think I can score 5 GHB tactics, I have to list build into it if I'm going to score my 5 tactics throughout the game.
So how do you build your list with battle tactics? I'll share mine after you share yours, but do you do you build it with specific battle tactics in mind? Or yeah, tell me your process.
Yeah, totally. So in terms of like, yeah, the flow of the game, I always want magical dominance turn one.
No, sorry,
Oh yeah,
list
yeah,
construction, like list
yeah,
construction, like
yeah, for sure. So with that, I always want a wizard.
okay.
So yeah, even if I was like a corn player, I think taking a wizard in corn is just like, yeah, it just makes sense. And then again, we'll talk about it later, but turn 5, almost always, like, intimidating invaders is a tactic that you're almost always going to be able to score. So really, I'm looking to build into three battle tactics. And so yeah, then it truly depends on the quality of the book tactics. So I played a lot with OBR, and they've got their Kavalos Death Rider tactic. So cool, super easy. Got a charge with them, done. On a lot of battle plans, I need a unit of Immortus Guard to score their one. So that's brilliant. So and then I'm only looking for one GHB tactic. Whereas, potentially with some other worse books, it's, yeah, well, I need a hero to score led into the Maelstrom, or I need a unit with retreat and charge to open up bait and trap. So yeah, it's hard because it is very much a depends question.
Yeah, so maybe like just to
Yeah.
give you an example of how I construct my lists, just for the folks
Mm-hmm.
listening, I will still build my list thinking about how do I win the game? Do I have, 2 to 4 key damage dealing threats? Do I have something that can hold the back line and can be the defensive anvil, as you might have heard the terminology? I look at the various support pieces, and you're right, each faction is going to be different. In my
Yeah.
cities of Sigmar, I've got a couple of key units, and they're always supported by a hero. If I look at my Gits, I've got power pairs or power trios. My Gargants clearly needs no support; they do what they do, and then every army in between. There's a variety, right? I look at my army once I've constructed the 2,000 points, and then I say, how good do I think this will do? Not only just killing my opponent, which is obviously one of the first things that everyone thinks about, is like, how can I do the most amount of damage? Do I have mortal wounds? Do I have rend? Do I have a killy hero? All of the fun things that we like to do. But then it's a refinement process of going, well, can this score battle tactics? And as I look at my general's handbook, as I look at my battle tome, are there ones that I'm probably leaving on the table because I don't have the right tools? And then should I bring in something, maybe pull back on the killy power a little bit, but bring in that cheap unit of spider riders who can help run up the board, help me score bait and traps, surround and destroy, those types of things that, yeah, they're not the big damage dealing monster that I would love to run, but they're the smart choice that are going to help me score my tactics and screen and do other things.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's understanding the path to victory that your army has. Like if you're running a smashy like Alpha Strike army, then maybe worry a little less about tactics. Like often those games are going to be done turn 2 to 3 either way, and so it's either going to be a big win or big loss. But yeah, if you're playing an army where you're going to play the whole 5 turns and it's going to be close, then knowing you've got those battle tactics nailed down is really important.
Yeah, so a couple of qualifying questions we've written up. So first off, can your army score battle tactics early? So turn 1, turn 2 are usually when there might be minimal engagement. Alex, you mentioned earlier about magical dominance in this particular season.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to explain a little bit more about your thinking around that T1, T2?
Yeah. So essentially, in terms of the flow of the game, turn 1 and turn 5 are where probably the least stuff's happening, because turn 1 you're miles apart. Turn 5 everything's dead normally. So for those turns, you're looking at doing tactics where you're having to engage with your opponent as little as possible. The reason why magical dominance turn 1 is so good is that, especially if you've got an army with 3 or 4 or 5 wizards who are buffing your stuff, if you're trying to cast that stuff maybe turn 2 or something, and you've just kept one wizard right at the back so you can still score it, you're missing out on loads of buffs, debuffs, damage in what is a more important turn than turn 1. So yeah, ideally magical dominance turn 1. Obviously though, that cannot happen. We've mentioned Seraphon already. Also, there's quite big power in taking turn 1 to deny your opponent magical dominance. So you might have set up your little wizard 31 inches away from all your other opponent's heroes and casters, and then they take turn, move into range, and now you're like, yeah, like now it's risky. Now I can't score it. So having a backup plan is always really good. Surround and destroy, depending on the battle plan, can be very good. You might have a book tactic, or worst case scenario, just just go down 2 points early. Like I've seen people talk about, oh, what happens if you go back down by a battle tactic? It's like, how often do you see games go 28 all? Like if we're talking about standard scoring, it's like it's not that common. Like there will be an opening later in the game. What you don't want to do is go for some like long bomb, like led into the maelstrom, which throws you massively out of your game plan.
Yeah, if you are finding yourself in a position where this is probably more in the flow of the game, but if I can't score a turn 1 battle tactic for whatever reason, or I try to do magical dominance in this season and it's unbound for whatever reason, or I fail the cast, I roll a miscast and there's just nothing I can do about it, it's dice. It just means that if I want to win the game and I want to keep the momentum, I really need to just push on to objectives to score that 1, 2 or more. So don't leave points on the table, and the same is true. Like if my opponent is dominating the objectives, what I can do initially is prepare for the 5 rounds and make sure I'm still scoring my battle tactics. And hell, if I've lost the game, if I don't have many bodies on the board left and my opponent is dominating the objectives, are there battle tactics I can keep scoring and at least bridge the gap of the points difference between us? So you're never out of the fight, and especially as we get to the table and you see your ranking, every battle tactic and every objective is going to count. So fighting for those 5 rounds is critical.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's worth mentioning at this point we would talk about getting points late in the game, but that's again why Intimidate the Invaders turn 5 is so good. Because if you've only got 1 unit left, if you've been almost tabled and you're able to score that last turn, and that just gets you that 2 points you need to go 1 place higher, or maybe even win if you've scored really big early. Whereas if you've kind of used that early game when perhaps you had something else on, you could really kick yourself later on.
Or you've lost your grand strategy because it was spellcasting savant and your wizard general is dead. Okay, well, if I can just keep scoring my battle tactics, I should be able to get the win, or bridge the gap so it's not as big of a loss. There's one thing I do want to rewind really quickly on around the T1. You talked about magical dominance in this season. This also is probably a good time to introduce. This is where battalions come into play. If you are a 1-drop and that you're going to be taking the top or bottom of turn 1 because you get to choose, then setting up in a way to deploy your wizard out of unbind range is much more powerful than if you don't get the determination to determine who goes first and who goes second. So you need to have a plan on what happens if I go first, what happens if I go second. Is there a wizard to unbind? Maybe I let my opponent cast their spells and I keep the primal dice up my sleeve to make sure I score that spell, or I deploy someone out of range to ensure that I get that first battle tactic of magical dominance.
Yeah, for sure. Like it's not exactly on battle tactics, but there's definitely this GHB a real power in being able to take first turn. Like generally in the past, the prevailing wisdom was you take second and then you're not going to get doubled, and maybe you'll get a good double turn down the line. With this GHB, with how important magical dominance is turn 1, with how tight games are becoming, actually being able to score 5 points turn 1, deny your opponent their battle tactic on their turn 1, holds a lot of power as long as you can, as long as you've list built to, not be too worried by the double turn.
So a couple of rhetorical questions we have, and some of them will be important to you, some of them won't be as important. But a couple of conversation starters as you review your list is, Can my army score battle tactics in the early game where combat is unlikely because you're advancing up the board? It's very unlikely you'll be in combat in turn one. Yes, there is some situations where you will be in combat turn one, but in most cases you won't be. To Alex's point, in the late game, a lot of things are dead. So how do I score particular things? And what do I score when there's little interaction or there's not as many troops on the board? And obviously in the mid game, when in the thick of combat, things are dying. What are the good battle tactics to choose at that particular point? There are a couple of other questions you might ask yourself, like, do you have battle tactics that are locked to specific keywords, whether it might be Antorian Acolytes or Locust, whether it might be Monster or Leader, whether it might be score it with a battle line option, a Wizard, a Priest. There's a whole range of sub-faction and various ways that some battle tactics will be locked. So if you want to increase your point, as Alex had mentioned earlier, around you don't want to think about scoring just 5, but you want to have a pool of at least 7 to 10 good options, so that when you find yourself in a situation where you can't score a battle tactic, let's say Khorne, you're playing Khorne and they've got their Hex Gorgeous Skulls up and a couple of Blood Ties to automatically unbind your spell, then maybe holding off Magical Dominance and having something else would actually be a better choice, as opposed to trying to force through and hope for the best you get that spell off, because that's what you've planned it around.
Yeah, for sure.
A couple of other questions you might ask yourself is around which units are best to position to score each battle tactic. So will you need to commit a extra command point, a spell, a prayer? We alluded to lead into the Maelstrom, where you want to have a hero and you want to have a battle line go into combat. If you're running a bunch of squishy 5-wound wizard idiots, they're going to die. So maybe you need to think about some tanky, something a bit more durable with an armor save or reward that could play into that role, or maybe you don't use Lead to Maelstrom as much.
Yeah, totally. Or it's even just having a hero that you're willing to lose, because if you're charging in your buff piece wizard who's makes your big hammer way better, and then you lose him, that's devastating. Like, yes, you scored your tactic, but you've suddenly lost a load of output. Whereas if you've just got a cheap little hero that just goes in, fights a bit and dies, you're like, cool.
That's its role. Like if your role is to go in, like, for example, I could do that with, let's say, a Spider Scuttle Boss. Scuttle Boss, independent little hero, 100 points. It goes in, it charges, it does its thing. If it dies, there's no key command ability or buff or thing that it does in my army that I'm now worse for it. I'm just down 100 points, but I'm certainly up on my battle tactic.
Yeah, exactly.
The couple of other things is, are there units in your book that would improve the either the available battle tactics or the likelihood of scoring them? So we alluded to either some keyword stuff or, like I was talking to a Slaves to Darkness player the other week, and we were talking about things like your Harpies, or your Canary, just little cheap mobile screening units that can go around stealing objectives. You can put them to sides of the board and do things around the table to help score you battle tactics, and they're not critical to win the game because they're not in combat, they're not super melee, they're not super damaging. You're not putting in like you're not putting a unit of 3 Gore Grunters to the 6-inch side of the board just to score battle tactics. You really want your Gore Grunters in the middle dealing damage, so you're not losing around a combat there.
Yeah, exactly. And that comes down to a point cost thing, doesn't it? Like Furies are 80 points or whatever. So 160 points to score an early tactic and then be a pain for the rest of the game. Like, that's amazing value.
And you know what? It could be your ally choice. Are there allies that you can bring in? That could be that, your army might not natively have that cheap screening fast unit or a durable unit, but you sure as hell could have an ally. I talked to an Iron Jaws player, Scooter, and we're talking about the value of Scraggrot in an Iron Jaws list. Be able to do magical supremacy with his magical spell, or helping you deny your opponent with magical dominance because of his pluses to unbind. So even if your army isn't natively strong in a particular area, you can look at your allies to fill those roles. Do you have any, off the top of your head, any allies you like to pull out to help you score? I referred to Aether Wings as an example. Very cheap. I don't care if they die. Go score me a couple of battle tactics, and then you've paid for yourself.
Yeah, I think the two standouts are, as I mentioned, Furies. Like a lot, like Corn List, for example, which struggle with tactics, run Furies now. Knight Incanter is amazing in order, just for that auto unbind. Again, you take first, you get him into unbind range of everything, and then as long as he's alive, you're just stopping them scoring magical dominance, which is super, super strong. They feel like the two off the top of my head. I'm sure there's plenty of others though.
A couple of good examples, and it kind of just reinforces that if your faction doesn't have those cheap, I mentioned Canary earlier. Taking a unit of Canary, they automatically deep strike. They can steal a couple of battle tactics for you while the rest of your army does its thing. It's worth putting in the 100 to 200 points. Something like a pre-game move, like your Untamed Beasts or your Free Guild Wild Corp. They've got a pre-game move. Things like that. Those are a good ally choices if you're lacking in a particular area.
Yeah, totally.
And then a couple of other things as well is, just scoring your battle tactics, put your grand strategy at risk. We alluded to running in your hero to, sure, helps you get a lead into the Maelstrom, but was it your general? Is it something that you probably need later on? Maybe playing around it could be a better option. And then what do you do when, turn 1, turn 5, where there's minimal interaction between you and your opponent, at least in melee and shooting, right? A couple of trade pieces here and there.
Yeah, for sure.
Anything else you'd add here when it comes to list construction? I feel like this is pretty robust and at least some early thinking. And obviously, when we get into what does this mean for each of the factions, then it probably unlocks a lot of other questions. But this is probably early thinking around how we think of list construction and battle tactics.
Yeah, exactly. I think just the thing worth reinstating is that it depends on the army. Sometimes you're going to have to really heavily list build into tactics. Other times you're going to have to just double check and be like, cool, I'm happy. My list does what it needs to do.
Well, the other thing that that works here is not just what my army does and what my opponent does, but also what battle plan we're playing. And each battle plan might make things easier or harder to score. Do you want to explain this example here on the screen?
Yeah, for sure. So essentially you've got one map with quarter territories, the other one with half territories. On both, Magical Mayhem are available turn 1, but Intimidate the Invaders would be super, super hard, or like not even turn 1, just like early game, because the difference between getting half your stuff over a quarter of the way up the board versus half the way up the board is huge. And if you were to push that hard early on to get all of your stuff over the right hand territory, you'd just be there waiting for your opponent to absolutely smash you.
Yeah, this is really an example here where if anyone's listened to any of the talking series, I'll often ask my guest, what are the turn 1 battle tactics that you'd normally pick? And Magical Mayhem and Intimidate the Invaders in this particular General's Handbook, I keep referring to that because if you watch this in 12 months' time, it will change and you'll think about how it all works. But you'll see with this no man's land in the left-hand example, it makes Intimidate the Invaders so much easier to score. So even if I was playing against Khorne or Seraphon, I can score that easier. But on the right-hand side, Magical Mayhem might be easy against certain opponents, but Intimidate the Invaders, unless I have incredible speed or I have a lot of deep striking or I can summon, like it's just not even summon, like it's just the other side for Intimidate the Invaders is just so much harder. So maybe Intimidate could be turn 2 or turn 3 as opposed to turn 1.
Yeah, totally. And yeah, there's numerous tactics where the battle plans affect whether or not you can score them. Like surround and destroy, again on that left hand mission on Geomantic Pulse, super easy. You just walk 2 units on your flanks out a couple of inches and you've scored it. Whereas again on that right hand map, they've got to go, what is it, 10, 11 inches up the board in order to get out of your territory to score surround and destroy. There's also often book tactics that might rely on, being in or outside of your territory, and they can massively change how easy they are depending. My favorite example of this is in OBR, you've got one called Sculptor's Entourage, which is to basically have your hero and your Mortis Guard contesting an objective wholly outside your territory. Now, on the left map, that's a gimme. Like, you'll score that every single game without interacting with your opponent. It's, brilliant. On that right-hand map, maybe you score at turn 4 or 5. And then there's other maps like The Only Way is Forward, where all of the objectives are on the edge of your territory, where you can't score it at all. And so suddenly that tactic that you bank on, turn 2, turn 3, can become impossible just because of the battle plan. And the idea is you're not caught out when you come into a battle plan you're not familiar with, because you've already planned it. You've already right, that battle plan, I can't score that tactic. What am I going to do?
And planning it out can be sitting down and thinking about the sequence, like your preferred sequence. Like in this situation, I would like to score these ones. And, it takes repetition, it takes time, but you can sit down with a piece of paper and kind of map it out, some of the best case scenarios. But on the right-hand side, my question to everyone is, if you were up against Khorne or Seraphon, example, or some type of really magic-heavy army, let's say Tzeentch, or they've got the Knight Incantor, there's a Stormcast Knight Incantor list, it's hard to get Intimidate. It's now hard to score Magical Mayhem or Magical Dominance. Why don't I pick Magical Mayhem? Oh, I think I'm at Magical Dominance anyway. Like, that doesn't make any sense. I'm gonna edit that in post-production. But like, if I'm gonna have Magical Dominance, right, I cast that Mystic Shield for lols. If I can't do that because there's that auto unbind for the Knight Incantor, then what's my third choice? Is it Surround and Destroy? Is it something in my book that I can help get that scoring in turn 1? Or to your point, do you just not score one? Do you just like throw a 1 away? And then you worry about scoring turn 2 to 5.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's the worry, is people get kind of panicked by not being able to score their tactic. And so, maybe a long bomb led into the Maelstrom's on, but they have to send a unit and a hero massively up forwards up the board, and throws everything out of position. And that actually makes them lose like bigger, because their entire game plan they've had to just throw into the wind. And so just sometimes suck it up and just being like, okay, I'm down 2 points, where do I go from here?
And don't freak out. I see people freak out when they lose their battle tactic, and then they start doing more risky plays in order to try to catch up. And actually, that can actually be at a detriment to you, because you do more errors, your opponent capitalizes, and you just get further down and you just do more risky plays.
Yeah, for sure. And looping back around, you briefly mentioned about planning. Like if more talking about tournaments, but these days you normally know what battle plans are going to be in play at tournaments. If you know that, make a plan. Like before the tournament, just get a little diary and just right. Well, Geomantic Pulse is my game 1, so all these tactics are going to be really, really easy. Brilliant. Oh, game 2 is limited resources. Right, I need to put a bit more thought into how I'm going to score my battle tactics over the course of the game. And then you can just go into that game, confident, knowing that you've got a plan. And obviously, things can go wrong. It doesn't always go to plan, but at least you've got a starting point.
Yeah, you're not scrambling at the start of the hero phase going, what do I score? And, if you're playing at an event with a chess clock, your time is counting down, or you feel like you're under pressure to make an example, a choice, and you just pick the one that's like the first thing that comes to mind, where actually it may not have been the best option, or an opportunity, if you thought about it for a brief second, would have shown you actually there's one that is really good to strike right now. Seize it while you can.
Yeah, for sure. I think, I talked about the rabbit hole earlier of how far you want to go down. But for me, if I know the battle plans for a tournament, I will write down, games 1 to 5. I will, have a heading for Geomantic Pulse. I will put a little bit of my general game plan. So, push units a little bit to the left, but play for the middle. And then I will put my 5 battle tactics that I believe I'm going to score. And, sometimes, turn 2 and 3 can be interchangeable. So I might put Led into the Maelstrom / Bait and Trap, and then repeat it for turn 4. And I'll do that for all 5 of my games. And then I can just come into that game and I'm like, cool, I have a plan. And then I can put more brain power into how I'm going to beat my opponent, how to stop them from scoring tactics. And it opens up way more. But as I said, that requires you wanting and being willing to put a little bit of that time in to do that. And not everybody wants to. That's fine.
All it takes is 5 minutes over a coffee. Just like, right, this is my starting point. Now it may change throughout the game, but it's a starting point, and that gives you a base to work off.
Yeah, exactly.
Which kind of leads really nicely into, okay, so I've made my list. Alex, you and I are playing in a tournament. We look at each other. We've shared lists. We've shaked hands. We've got ourselves a drink. And as we're playing the game, you'll notice that we talked about it earlier, the battle tactics become easier or harder, whether it is the opponent that you're facing and the faction or the sub-faction that they're running, the battle plan that you're on. We just showed the example of Intimidate the Invaders and the difference between having a no man's land and taking up literally half the board. But we come up with a bit of a trademark proprietary. We've made this up. This is not some official Games Workshop like traffic light system, but it seems to work in society. So we kind of thought we'd steal it. And the way we think about it is around, well, what are the battle tactics that we're most likely to score? And I'll let Alex share it off in a second. Yeah, but what's most easy to score? What are ones that are often scored and like sometimes scored? And then what are rarely scored? And you can apply this methodology in any general's handbook, any battle tome, any set of battle tactics. And that allows me to really clear my head and plan in advance. What are your thoughts, and how do you want to kind of expand upon what I've just shared?
Yeah. I think firstly it's worth talking about how this traffic light is fluid. Like, it's not set in stone. So what might be a green on one battle plan might be a red on another one, or what might be green into one matchup might be red into another. So understanding the criteria within this is important. But in terms of the ebb and flow of a game, I've talked about it a couple of times already, but turn 1 and 5, the least stuff's happening. Turn 2, stuff's starting to happen. Turn 3 and 4, lots is normally happening. Understanding that having tactics where you don't have to interact with your opponent, and then understanding you've got tactics where you need to interact with your opponent and when they're going to happen within the game. In an ideal world, you score 5 tactics where you don't have to interact with your opponent. And there are armies where that can happen. Soulblight, Big War, I've already talked about. Like, you can probably, sit on points, score 5 tactics, and score your 28 points. But most books don't have that. So then you're having to look into the orange and maybe even into the red. And that's where the planning comes in, because then it doesn't just happen. You've got to set it up, whether it's, the turn before you get your hero in a position to charge for Led into the Maelstrom the following turn, whether it's in list building where you're bringing those 3 Pestilence Priests or whatever else. Like, as you go further down the traffic light system, you need to be more planned and more prepped.
So, to bring this to life, let's say, for example, we talk about something that's often scored. That could be you often score it because, for example, I have a Gloomspite Gits one called Follow the Moon. And Follow the Moon basically is hold objectives and make sure my is it Moonlight Raid? I think it's Follow the Moon, where basically I've got to control an objective that I think my opponent had controlled, and my army's under the light of the bad moon. So Scragrot once per game can control the moon to either be in the middle of the board or stay in the middle of the board. which means that I can set that up very easily, that turn 2, I often score follow the moon. It's pretty often. There's some situations where it won't happen, but it's pretty often.
Yeah. And I think it's worth noting there that, again, when we talk about planning, like if that's your turn 2 plan, if you haven't planned it, if you risk that 4 up to move the moon and you roll a 1, 2, or 3 so the moon stays in the corner, suddenly your turn 2 battle tactic is off. And if you've not thought about that beforehand, you roll the moon before planning for your tactic. Whereas if you know, okay, I need the moon over the whole board to score my tactic next turn, you use Scragot's ability and it's easy.
Perfect, spot on. Or it could be, like we talked about magical dominance before. We're keeping it generic for the folks, just because, if we get into too much of the weeds of the factions, it won't be relevant to everyone. But magical dominance, for example, cast a spell, it's not unbound, you win. Great. It's often scored. It's pretty rare unless you roll a miscast, or you go up against a magical defensive army who can shut you down. It's pretty easy to score. But if we go up against Khorne and they've got some Blood Tithe or some Hexgorger Skulls up or Seraphons on the board, they've got their board wide unbind, that battle tactic goes from an often to a pretty rare one.
Yeah, exactly. And so, just being aware of how different matchups can affect the ease with which tactics is super important, and having a plan B. Like, it's all very well having magical dominance plan A, but game 5, table 1, you come against Seraphon, what do you do?
Or another example could be bait and trap, another very popular one in this season. But what happens if my opponent has a Kronspine or something that stops me from retreating? All of a sudden, what used to be quite easy as a green or an orange becomes a red, because I just can't. That spell or that Kronspine or something is stopping me from doing bait and trap. So I need something else to take its place in my 5 battle rounds.
Yeah, exactly. And then it's also being aware that, if you still need that battle tactic, it's like, right, well, I need to kill that Kronspine before I can score that battle tactic. And then that becomes your priority. It's like, right, like 2 turns, let's deal with that Kronspine. I've got these, maybe I push intimidate the invaders forwards by a couple of turns, if that's what you absolutely have to do. And then, it's like, cool, Kronspine's dead. Now I can retreat and score bait and trap.
It also might mean that, if you're doing something like, let's say, for example, leading to the Maelstrom, where you've got to keep, a unit or a battle line in combat, you might have to save a command point or 2 up and not risk battle shock, because if that battle line unit was to run away, you may actually lose that that battle tactic completely because of overkill, or you've lost your own troops.
Yeah, exactly. Again, this comes back round to having a plan. Like, if next turn, you'd like to score bait and trap, then tag in the corners of some units so that they're in combat. And then you're like, right, well, if I get the double turn next turn, that's an absolutely nailed on tactic. Or if you've got a screen, having another unit behind that gets pulled into combat, so that if your opponent charges you, they kill the screen, you're then pulled into combat, and then you can bait and trap next turn. But you can only do these plays if you've got a plan.
And another example is, as I've got my command points and I've generated command points for the turn, I'll put a command point onto the side, and I reserve that for like my Inspiring Presence command. Or if I'm using a particular spell, I'll put my primal dice to one side, because that is what's going to get me magical mayhem. I'm not going to spend that on getting on other spells. I've planned it so that those resources will help me score particular particular battle tactics.
Yeah, for sure. And you can roll your primal dice before going for magical dominance. Like, if you want to be like super safe and super sure, like you've always got that in your back pocket. It's also worth talking about, when we're talking about this green light, like there's an argument even that magical dominance could be somewhere down the end of it, of the green towards the orange, just because there are dice involved. Whereas some armies, like OBR has a command trait, Sylvaneth has an artifact which allows them just to autocast and it not be unbound. And it's like, right, well then that's absolutely nailed on. and that's like the brightest of the green tactics. And just being able to pull that out even against Seraphon is brilliant.
You're right. You can absolutely build into that. Do you take Master of Magic command trait to re-roll that spell? Do you look for arcane terrain in your territory in order to get the extra boost? I was just talking to an Ogres player this morning. The More Pot gives them +1 to cast. So all of a sudden, each army for magical dominance can be easier or harder depending on what tools and resources you have and the risks associated to it. So you're right. It's not just purely green, orange, and red. There's definitely shades like Reprisal is the reddest of red because it rarely happens. And I don't want my general to die because I lose my extra command points through the battle rounds. There's so many things that trigger off. My grand strategy is tied to my general. So, I don't want to plan for Reprisal, but if it happens, then it might go from red to orange or green.
Yeah, exactly. And there's battle, there's armies where you're more likely to have Reprisal on than others. Like Seraphon has board wide mortal wounds, so if you've got like a little 5 wound hero for spellcasting Savant, in all likelihood, turn 2, turn 3, Croak's going to have killed him. So then it's knowing like, right, well now I've got Reprisal on. Like if I can get into that Seraphon castle with a go. Whereas, obviously there's other games. You've taken that grand strategy because you think you can keep your hero alive. So most of the time you just ignore it.
You mentioned earlier about having a plan, and on the example here on the screen, you can see a sequence I had against Khorne, right? So to bring this to life, and I've got some other examples for you. Great game with John, by the way, absolute gentleman of a player. So my opponent John had Khorne. I was playing my Gits. I went first, so I had a window to apply magical dominance, which was amazing. So the Hex Gorgeous Skulls weren't up, the Blood Tie weren't happening. So as long as I just cast a spell on myself, happy days. Then as the moon, I didn't use Scragrot's ability to hold the moon. I rolled the dice. And you can see that, unfortunately, I actually didn't get the moon to move into the center. It stayed in the bottom quadrant. So I know that in my game, if it hits the middle, I can go into Follow the Moon. If I fail it, I can go with Stab Him in the Dark. And I've got like a flow chart where I go either A or B. And then I can I know that eventually it's going to get into the center, so I can apply Follow the Moon. Then I went Intimidate. Then I went Magical Mayhem, and you know what I mean? Like some of these things were easy to set up as a sequence. Some of these things were a shot in the dark, like Magical Mayhem, trying to kill something in Khorne and hoping they didn't hit their 5-up shrug. Or I had enough mortal wounds from various spell sources that eventually I would get through, and I've done enough chip damage that if I get that one mortal wound through, the unit died, and I reduced the risk. So there's an example of how that kind of came about.
Yeah, for sure. And again, you can kind of see like the ebb and flow of that game. Like turn 1, you didn't do much, so you just saw magical dominance. Turns 2 and 3 are very much like aggressive tactics. Turn 4 was invaders, so things are starting to slow down again. And then you just had a stab in the dark, probably because not much was happening. So things like led into the Maelstrom and bait and trap wasn't on, so you just went for a long bomb tactic, which came off.
Yeah, and I de-risked it in certain ways. Again, this is not me trying to show you how amazing I am. It was more just this is an example of the flow that happened. But against a completely different army, the flow might change or it might stay the same. And once you stick to your army and you learn it and you get really familiar with it, you don't have to think about the sequence as much because you've had the repetition to know what's good and what's not good.
Yeah, totally.
So we had a couple of other examples. I might get you to share. Is there anything you want to share on this particular example around, like, this was an example around deployment and how you can start planning through a sequence more than just one battle tactic, but how you can like set up one or multiple battle tactics?
Yeah, for sure. So essentially, like, if we're kind of assuming that at base we're doing magical dominance turn 1, then all you have to do in deployment is make sure that your wizard is outside of 30. But then it's planning for turn 2. And it's it feels very safe and very easy to deploy in a castle, like on the left hand side. But that only leaves you open, maybe, if your opponent doesn't offer up any further tactics, that only leaves you with Intimidate the Invaders, which, as we talked about, maybe not the ideal tactic for turn 2. Whereas with just a little bit of like forethought and planning, you can start with some screens or cheap units. In this case, it's the Steel Hounds out on the flanks, and then you Magical Dominance turn 1. Turn 2, you go for Surround and Destroy, because you've got you've preset that up. Then on this tactic we've talked about, you've got an easy Intimidate the Invaders at some point in the game. And then because we're cities, they've got a couple of other easy tactics. Walk a command corps onto an objective. It's just super simple. So then suddenly, with just a bit of planning in your deployment turn 1, you've scored your 5 tactics potentially. And it just has that that flow throughout the game of making your life super easy.
And this is a great example of just the tools that we currently have. But what if I was to go back to list construction and keep those steel helms protecting my Fusilier castle, and maybe get myself a unit of cavaliers or 2, get myself some Aether Wing allies, get myself in something that can go on the flanks and help score those and be cheap, while still committing to my castle and protecting my Fusiliers and Hurricanum and all of those other things. So you aren't trading off the power of your army to score battle tactics, but you are setting things up through list construction, deployment, and some advanced planning.
Exactly, and this comes back to list building. I'm not 100% familiar with cities yet because I'm still pretending it doesn't exist.
Next week.
Exactly. But to my knowledge, you've got quite a few other easy tactics within the book. So maybe building into Surround and Destroy with those Aether Wings isn't super necessary. Whereas for other books, building into Surround and Destroy is really, really needed. And so again, it's just planning, list building, being aware of what you can and can't score, and then going from there.
I alluded to my gits where I run a lot of grots, so not a lot of squigs, not a lot of trolls, a lot of hordes of idiots. So for me to do basically put those grots on the flanks like the Steel Helms is a bad idea. And I alluded to earlier, playing around with Spider Riders, playing around with some squigs who are fast, they're cheap, they can run up the board, then they can get into the thick of the battle pretty quickly because of their speed, and they can then pack a punch. But if I do it with my Steel Helms, I do it with my Grots, I do it with some slow-moving battle line unit, then it could be out of the game for multiple rounds, just like I've wasted a bunch of troops and relying on the rest of my army to hold up and retain objectives, arm wrestle them in combat and all of the other things, be in range of buffs and support pieces.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, again, how much you plan is dependent on your army. Again, come back around to not all armies are the same. Some, a vague plan, but, you'll be fine. Others, you need to, every single turn, you need to be thinking ahead. And then, you just need to almost know that before getting into the army, because if you don't want to have to think that hard and plan that hard, maybe it's not an army for you, or maybe you've got to set your expectations in a way.
Yeah, and for example, my Stormcaster, for example, I can just deep strike down, and I could use translocate to. I'll put some, for example, I've got some really good shooting in long strikes and judicators, so they could be on the flanks, and they're contributing to the game. And if I need to move them around, I have translocate to pick them up and teleport them around the board. So it's not a big issue. But if I didn't have the teleport and I only had slow moving troops, you're right, I need to think these things through. And this is going to be relevant to some people more than others. It just depends on what army you're running, the tools, the units, the combinations. But just think about the context and think about the theory and how it applies to your army. Because what we've seen is some players will get to the battle round and say, what do I pick? And they're not thinking that 1 or 2 turns ahead Magical Mayhem is a perfect example where a battle tactic, you're unlikely to destroy a unit through one round of magic outside of like a spike of Hoarfrost. But if you're chipping away at a unit constantly, by the time that you want to apply Magical Mayhem, you've reduced them to enough damage where that risk is a lot lower.
Yeah, for sure.
Anything else you'd add here when it comes to planning and thinking ahead?
I don't think so, no.
Yeah. A lot of list construction, battle plans, again, just thinking through like what your ideal sequence is. And as we've said earlier, you can sit down right now and start thinking about what are some of those battle tactics you'd likely to score through the 5 rounds. And it might be multiple. It could be like, cool, well, turn 1, I'd likely to score this and this. Turn 2, likely this and this. Turn 3, likely this and this.
Yeah, totally.
Something that came up as we were kind of exploring this is we got a few questions around denying your opponent's battle tactics because they're worth points. Some tournaments incentivize you even further through denial. What's your thoughts and considerations when you think about playing the game and denying your opponent?
So, as with so much of this conversation, the answer is it depends. There's some armies where I will put quite a lot of thought into how I might stop their tactics. There's other armies where I'm just like, cool, they're scoring their tactics. I have to beat them on objectives. As an example, we'll go into the generic GHB ones in a minute, but if I'm against Khorne, I know that I'm not going within 8 inches of their altar because that's one of their easy tactics. But when we're talking about in-game, them going for these GHB tactics, it's super useful knowing your outs. So, this is an after they've chosen to go for their tactic, and you're like, oh, so they've chosen to go for led into the Maelstrom, but I might get a really good redeploy. Where it depends is, sometimes you can, even before they've had a chance to pick, you can try and stop them from scoring tactics. But a lot of books will just have 3 or 4 options, and you just trying to think about how you're going to stop any of those options from happening is just a complete don't bother. Whereas once they've picked the tactic, which is what we're going to talk about in a minute, some of them you've got a good shot at stopping. Others just like, okay, that's probably going to happen.
So when I go to a tournament, let's say you and I, round 3 pairings go up and it's Anthony versus Alex. I look at your list on BCP and I'm like, right, how do I stop the 15 different battle tactics Alex has available in Big War? No, that's not what you're thinking. And it's analysis paralysis, and it's completely not worth that. So what we're saying here is don't think about it at that very micro level. Some of it is worth more than others. Like some of them are going to be easier, as we're about to talk about. But denial is something as you're through the game, you're thinking, how do I stop my opponent, as opposed to too much forward thinking.
Yeah, exactly. And it's useful having, a couple of points for commonly seen armies. So, I've talked about Khorne with their altar. Like other ones, OBR is really, really common, and they're really reliant on having their Death Riders charge to score a tactic. So if you just have a little note against that army of kill the Death Riders before they get a chance to do the battle tactic, that's now put a massive buffer in your opponent's plans. Against KO, their battle tactic turn 1 almost every time. They won't deploy on objectives. You'll deploy on objectives, and then all they have to do is start the turn with less objectives and then end the turn with more. Well, if you deploy off the objectives, then you've denied them that really easy turn 1 tactic. And that doesn't take a huge amount of thought. That's just but it's so simple, and it can just, you're not stopping every single battle tactic in the KO army, but that's just one point of cool, now they're going to have to think a little bit harder. But there's also some armies where you just nah, don't bother trying to plan that.
And if I haven't played against KO very often, or it's not something I'm used to, maybe going into that level of thinking about KO is something that you just have to get repetition and get some games in. What I'm trying to say to everyone is don't get so overwhelmed about trying to deny your opponent. if I'm thinking about this particular process, I'm thinking about the most common ones from the General's Handbook. Intimidate the invaders, magical dominance, bait and trap, lead into the maelstrom, surround and destroy. They are probably the most common that your opponents will be trying to score. So that's true of everyone. So putting a little bit of thought around what you could possibly do to stop them, if anything.
Exactly, and yeah, I talked about it earlier. There's power in taking first turn because that stops magical dominance. So if you can build a list that can take the double turn and can turn off your opponent's magical dominance, that's one way that you're denying your opponent potentially a battle tactic straight away. But then there's also being aware that on some battle plans, as we talked about, surround and destroy or invaders might be super easy. So then it's like, well, is it worth it? Because they can just score one of these other tactics anyway.
So let's go back to magical dominance for a second, because we've talked about it a lot in this recording so far. So you and I are playing, and I pick magical dominance at the top of the turn that's my battle tactic. I want to score it, right? So we've put a couple of examples here on the screen. So what are you thinking? I picked magical dominance. We've just finished deployment. I want to cast a spell. What could you possibly do, if anything, to deny me from getting that cheap magical dominance?
So generally, there's nothing. If your opponent does it right, there's nothing you can do. They're outside of 30. Some things you can do is have a non-casting hero more advanced than your wizards, and then you can get heroic willpower if your opponent doesn't necessarily spot that. But ultimately, if they've done everything right, outside of like a few specific interactions that some armies have, there's nothing you can really do to stop it. You just accept it. But if they go for magical dominance and you're within 30 inches or whatever, you just unload all those primal dice into it. Like, it's worth just going all in, trying to stop that tactic from going off.
I would challenge you and say that it doesn't always happen perfectly. The theory definitely is the opponent deploys a wizard out of unbind range of 30, and it sounds like it. But the amount of times my opponent has had that intention, but because I've had a couple of wizards, I've got that hero who, you put it out to the side, but I can use heroic willpower to get an unbind of some capacity. You'd be surprised more often enough, the average person will have a wizard within 30 inches to unbind. At the top tables, very much you probably can avoid that, and it's not going to happen. But on the average table, I think a lot of players, and for you, if you're picking magical dominance, it's being specific and deploying something completely in the corner and avoiding every 30-inch unbind.
Exactly. And this is a key time, like, talk about playing to intent. Like, if you're going for magical dominance, just measure it and say to your opponent, happy that you've got no unbinds within 30 inches of me, and then there's no ambiguity. It's just like, you're good to go. Whereas if you measure and you like slightly mismeasure and actually they're like 29 inches away, and then you go into the game and your opponent measures, you don't really have a leg to stand on. It's like, like, you're right, I mismeasured that, that's my bad.
So pre-measuring, and I guess what I'm trying to say here is that in some of these things like magical dominance, it is much easier to plan. If you're worried about that turn one magical dominance, you have the ability, if you have multiple wizards, to spread them out and to maximize how you get within 30 if possible. Sometimes they won't, but being deliberate in your deployment will help. Tapping into heroic willpower and not just automatically trying to generate the extra CP. If you've got primal dice, reserving them in such a way that you can unbind, and even deploying on arcane terrain. So these are some of the things you can do when the situation arises. Now, is it perfect? Is it going to happen 100%? No. But you can think these things through to try to stop magical dominance.
Yeah, totally. And especially if it's not happening on that first turn right after deployment where your opponent's deployed outside of 30. Like, if you push up, if you save your primal dice on your turn for your opponent's turn, knowing that you're kind of backing them into a corner, then you've got a real good chance at shutting it down.
Any other examples that you find that are easy or much more easier to try to deny your opponent. Like we talked earlier before we started around redeploy. Redeploy, there's like 2 battle tactics requiring a charge of some capacity. Keeping a CP up your sleeve for a redeploy is a great way to try to deny your opponent.
Yeah, totally. Also, with Legend to the Maelstrom, they have the really key thing is one of those units has to be in combat at the end of the combat phase, or is it the end of the turn? And so actually letting your stuff run to Battle Shock, like, or like the really sneaky tactic you can do is you can break coherency. If you've got one model at the back outside of 3 inches of your opponent, if you break coherency, which by that I mean remove some models so as the whole unit isn't within an inch of itself, of each other model, then when it comes to the Battle Shock phase, you just lift up all that unit, bar that one model at the back, and then suddenly that unit is no longer within 3 inches. But yeah, that's like kind of a not high level play, but one that requires like quite a bit of thought. But yeah, just letting stuff run to Battle Shock, doing pile-ins so as you might pile away from that unit. Like Legend to the Maelstrom is actually quite a tricky one, like both in terms of you planning it to score it. The way I'll often do it is I'll charge one unit and then I'll 2.9 inch another unit just with the very edge of my unit. So I know if I kill that unit I'm charging, I'm still tagged to that neighboring unit, and so I'm not going to fail it. So yeah, that's one that I often find gets messed up. Surround and destroy as well. So I started this GHB playing OBR, and it's a very tight castle, so I never scored surround and destroy because I couldn't put the resources off to the side. And then I went back to playing some other armies. The first few games I failed surround and destroy every time because I forgot they had to be within 6 inches of the table edge. Like I was so focused on getting them outside of my territory and on the flank, I forgot about the wholly within 6 inches of the territory. So just like knowing where you might go wrong with things, like, yeah, it's really good.
The other call out I would make is there are some that are just not worth your attempt, right? Like to try to deny your opponent doing intimidate the invaders. It's very niche. Like if my army is like Squigs or Iron Jaws or some type of super fast army, yeah, I can run up the board and put pressure and stop you from getting out of your territory. Surround and destroy, same thing. I could put the pressure on the flanks and make it harder for you. But in a lot of situations, it's probably not worth trying to deny your opponent surround and destroy or intimidate. Unless you have particular armies and particular situations, you might find better off magical dominance, magical mayhem, bait and trap, leading to the maelstrom are probably ones that are more likely for you to deny when the situation arises.
Yeah, exactly. And I think even then, like most commonly, battle tactics are failed due to mistakes by the person selecting them, but whether it's choosing the wrong tactic at the wrong time or just making a mistake in the setup of it. I think it's actually short of that big 6 on a redeploy. Like it's quite you can do your bit, finest hour to stop your unit from dying or whatever else, but more often than not, it's probably actually your opponent making a mistake.
Yeah, and there's definitely things you can do. Depend,
Mm-hmm.
like some battle tome, battle tactics. That's a mouthful.
Mm-hmm.
Might be like kill the thing, and if that's the case, then applying the finest hour, applying rally, issuing all that defense, any debuffs you possibly can to increase the survivability of said unit. But to your point as well, if it is stay in combat or some type of survivability thing, then actually letting them run to battle shock actually could be the right play. So where instinctively you want to apply the inspiring presence. So there are options. It's just how much are you willing to commit to this and what's the impacts throughout the entire game. So there's no easy answer. I think we've kind of given you ideas, but there's a lot of gray.
Exactly. It depends, doesn't it? Like I think the things that you can do is planning, is have an idea of like how you might stop your opponent from doing what they want to do, knowing the things that might go wrong for you, and making sure that you don't fall into those traps. But then after that, it will depend matchup to matchup, game to game, battle plan to battle plan.
And again, think about this in the context of your army. And if you're thinking about how do I score my maximum battle tactics, think about, what are the risks associated to scoring mine? And, it might take a little bit of time, and it might be, go to a math hammer site and think about, how much damage a unit can take or can deal out, and understanding the numbers you can expect from a unit would give you a better idea. Sometimes, we'd lead into the maelstrom. Maybe you need to split your attacks to make sure that you are still in combat within 3 inches, and you don't completely destroy the unit. Or you don't maximum pile in and you just tag a unit, do some damage, but you don't do all of your attacks and you haven't piled in completely. There's a lot of things to consider.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and yeah, having thought about this beforehand allows you to be able to do it in game, because if the first time you've thought of, tagging a unit 2.9 inches or not piling in all the way so you don't do all the attacks, if the first time you're thinking about it is in the game, it's probably too late. You're probably like, oh, I could have done that, damn it.
Yeah, really, really good point. Like, again, pre-planning, thinking, and one of the things that we talked a lot about as well is the tools and the resources available to you. How do you track, and do you have any resources that you use to kind of help you through your games or your planning or your your interactions in on the tabletop?
Yeah, so as mentioned, I've got a bit of a diary that I take to a game, or to a tournament generally. So yeah, basically for that, it will be, if I know the the 5 games, I'll have the 5 game or the 5 battle plans written out with the 5, or maybe it'll be 7 tactics that I've got written out, but the turns that I'm likely to score those tactics. And if I don't know that, then maybe the best thing is to have it written out for all, whatever it is, 12 battle plans, or just like pick out the ones that are specific to you, like you might find specifically difficult. So like limited resources, which we talked about, because of the half and half territories, make some of the tactics harder. So maybe I'll put a bit more thought into that. So that's kind of what I'll come into the game with. But then I'll use the Tabletop Battles app to actually track my my battle tactics as I go, because once you're into the game, once you've selected magical dominance, then turn 2, when I'm looking to select, magical dominance is no longer an option in the app, so I can kind of very easily see what I've got left.
Yeah, so the couple of ones that we have on screen, but by no means is this the only option. So Goonhammer has a wonderful app called Tabletop Battles. It's available both on Apple and Android. What I love about it is if I'm at a tournament, it can connect up to BCP, and I can basically download my matchup. So if I'm up against Khorne or Sylvaneth or whatever, I can have my games ready to go. And as we're going through the game, let's say it's Gitz versus Seraphon, it'll have the Seraphon battle tactics, and we can track them throughout the game, which is great. So I can see what's available, what's not available. And as you saw in the last example, which was me versus John, you'll see the flow of the game, what was scored, what wasn't scored, if there was some bonus points, like I killed an Antorian Locust on an objective. And at the end of the game, it's super transparent for me and my opponent on not just the points, but actually what was scored when, and if there's any questions or challenges, we can go through it pretty easily.
Yeah, for sure. I think the only thing to be aware of, which I've had with the app, is that I've occasionally forgotten to tick that I've scored a tactic or something, or my opponent has, and then I've thought the points are different going into turn 5 than they have been. So just be really hot on it.
That's a user error,
totally.
That's a user error,
Totally.
not an app error. So a couple of other ones is Dork Dom Gaming. I personally own this, but there are other erasable General's Handbook score sheets. So you can go to like your local stationery store and buy a little whiteboard, like the erasable whiteboard, mark it all up. Very, very cheap. I do enjoy my Dom Gaming one, because it also can tie into my particular battle tactics. I know Pro Painted has one as well. You can get some acrylic ones, so they are very helpful. What I'm actually got in my hand, I love. So these are the printable battle tactic cards that are available on the AOS Shorts website. It's all free. And what I love about it is I just bought some cheap Magic the Gathering like card sleeves, went to my local library, printed the cards off, cut them up, and it allows me to play with them like it's a game of poker, so I can see what's available, what's not available, and in my hand as well, like prioritize and shift the ones that I'm going to score and what I'm not going to score.
Yeah, totally.
The last one as well is even just having like a printable score sheet. So weirdknobs.com has one up, a color and a non-colored one. So you can just have like a printed visual, or as Alex has said as well, just a notepad. Like just there's so many ways for you to track. I think if you buy the Games Workshop War Scroll cards, they often have battle tactics. Your General's Handbook will often have little cards you can play as well. So any visual aids can be helpful to know what you've got available to you.
Yeah, for sure. And just having something like, not having to, commit it to memory, or go back into your battle tome and leaf through, and then go back into your GHB and leaf through. Like, just having something is so good.
And that's literally what I see. I see people go, right, it's my turn. What's my battle tactic? Then they open up the General's Handbook. They have a look what's on the page. And then they look and like, oh, what did I score? And sometimes they'll go, oh, I'm going to do this. You're like, no, dude, you already scored that two rounds ago. And like, oh, okay. So having whatever works for you, I guess. None of these are the silver bullet. But I personally use the Goonhammer Tabletop Battles app. I also use the Dork Dom Gaming and the cards as well. So actually, I use all of them. It depends on the situation. Yeah. These are all my personal recommendations. Tubbs, anything else you want to say at this particular point? I do have a couple of questions from Discord, but how are you feeling? And do you think we've given everyone enough of an idea of how to start thinking about your battle tactics, thinking about them more strategically, planning ahead, whether it is through the list construction, whether it is through the battle plan selection, whether it is planning in advance, maybe sitting down over a coffee and thinking about what can I score and how easy is it and when to score it? Anything that's kind of coming to mind that we haven't had a chance to acknowledge yet?
No, I don't think so. I think it's just like people also, more than what you think like subconsciously, a lot of what we've covered today you're already doing in your brain, like you already understand. It's just like having it out in front of you in black and white, and then you yourself putting that into practice, into your planning. It's just like it makes a massive difference. And then when you're in game, not having to think about this stuff, a 5-game tournament where every single game you're having to really think about those tactics, versus a 5-game tournament where that's all nailed on and you're thinking about your game plan and everything else. The mental load is going to be really, really different. But
planning this out, you've made a really good point, is that planning this out allows me to stay in the game and be more strategic and worry less about what battle tactics I'm scoring, but more about how do I again score those 5 points maximum between battle tactics and objectives. How do I respond to my opponent? How do I, like, you're very much in the game and you're not worried about these small little things. And you'll notice on the top tables, people just like pick the battle tactic really quickly. They know what their heroic action is going to be. They know what their monstrous rampage is because of deliberate practice, and they know what they need and what they're focused on through the game.
Exactly. Like we've all been there where we've had like a really, really tough game, like, especially if it's the last game of the day or whatever, and like your brain is just done. Like, and then you come into turn 4, turn 5, and like I've lost games where I've chosen the wrong tactic turn 4 or 5 because I've just been like scrabbling. Like it's hard, and again, whatever you can do to reduce that.
And that's where the cards for me really help, because then I can visually see really quickly. But hey, whatever works for you. A couple of burning questions I have from Discord if we're ready to go. So Mortark of Disease Pizza saying, at what point do you think it's worth discarding your battle tactics to gain an advantage on the board?
Like pretty commonly, yes, is the answer. I'd say it's worth doing. Like if your battle tactic that you need to do is at odds with what you need to do to win the game, then drop the tactic. I think the only time where that might be up for debate is if you know that your opponent is going to score max points on the next 2 turns and it's a draw or something like that, and you're like, right, well, I have to score every single point as well in order to get the win, so I've got to risk it. But generally speaking, like, your game plan comes first. It's no good scoring 10 points on your battle tactics if you've only scored 1 objective a turn for your entire game. Like,
yeah, it's a good call out. Like, are you in a position where you have dominance on the objectives and you're scoring 1-2 more? And if that's the case, then yeah, if you can't score your battle tactic but you're scoring 1-2 more, then you're at least still going up by 3. What you don't want to do is to change your battle plan, so your tactics, force yourself in a position to score your battle tactic, but then you lose out on the objectives. You might get double turned, and then your opponent has seized more board space, he's been able to kill, deny, and you've made yourself in one move a much harder uphill battle.
Yeah, exactly. Like another little example might be you've gone for magical dominance with your general, who is also your grand strategy, and you've rolled a 1 on one of the dices, and you primal dice or not. It's like, no, just drop it. Like, as I said earlier on, sorry, like, it's very, very rare that a game will go to 28-28. We make mistakes. Like, battle tactics get dropped. You might not score on objectives. Like, you can make the grounds up elsewhere.
No, you actually made a really good comment. So there's been plenty of times where I've picked Magical Mayhem as my battle tactic, knowing it's a risk. But I've got a couple of sources, right? Scragrot can do mortal wounds, Hoarfrost can do mortal wounds. I've got a couple of other spells. So I've got enough mortal wound spells to do Magical Mayhem. But let's say Scragrot rolls a 1, and I'm going to fail the spell. Do I put Primal Magic dice in and risk a Primal Miscast? For me, I'll as soon as I see a 1 on an original spell cast, I'm out. So I would rather lose Magical Mayhem or try to get other sources of mortal wounds from other spells and risk that, than try to force the situation and risk Scragrot or risk one of my spellcasting Savant Wizard and risk the grand strategy and risk the spell casts and the other things that would have happened through the game. Now, if it's turn 4 or turn 5, as you saw in the example with Khorne, sure, I'll risk it. But come turn 1 to turn 3, it's usually not worth the risk.
Yeah, exactly. It's more of like a last resort Hail Mary, which is ideally a situation you want to avoid.
Goes back to the traffic lights, red, amber, and green. Early game, I don't want to risk Magical Mayhem. Late game, yeah, sure. If I've got the lead and it's a comfortable lead, I can risk it. If it's neck and neck and we're quite tied, maybe it's not worth the risk.
For sure.
Manfred Mortark saying, battle tactics, how much is too much to commit to scoring a battle tactic? Particularly movement-based tactics. And that's a really good example, right? There's a couple like bait and trap that lead into the Maelstrom. Do I rush out really quickly in turn 1, turn 2, and risk it? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, in terms of movement-based, like we've talked about list building around like surround and destroy and stuff, so you can kind of commit stuff there. But again, it's does you rushing up into your opponent's face, charging when you shouldn't be charging, let's say to score lead into the Maelstrom, does that aid you or does it hinder you? And again, if it's going to be a super, super close game and you need to sit on those objectives and stop your opponent from getting onto the objectives, then maybe you just be like, okay, can't score 2 points, or I go some other way. It depends, isn't it? It's such a hard one because it depends on the situation within each game and the score and where we are in the game.
Well, give me some examples where, because we can't just say like, it depends.
Yeah.
That's like the worst masterclass ever.
Yeah.
Oh, just depends.
Yeah. So like if you've got a couple of fast moving hero and some fast-moving units to score lead into the Maelstrom, if you were sending them, 12, 14 inches ahead of like the rest of your units to try and score lead into the Maelstrom because it's the only thing you had on, because they're unsupported, you're losing them probably because they're probably hitting screens. So you're losing them without really gaining anything. Like, yes, you're scoring your tactic, but you've lost them, and now the rest of your army is kind of open to being punched back. So in that situation, I'd say, yeah, you just sit and you wait and you be defensive. Yeah.
Or, some other considerations to your point around it depends, putting on a Mystic Shield helps to de-risk the situation. Keeping the hero's finest hour up your sleeve, so if you lose a priority or if your opponent then comes at you, you've got another survivability mechanic. So I think there is a point where you can't commit too much. I think it ultimately comes back to what we talked about earlier, which is what's your grand strategy, what's your overall game plan, what are the tools you need to win this particular battle, and you don't want to overcommit too early because then you will just lose gas through the 5 rounds.
Yeah, I guess a good example actually is Intimidate the Invaders. Like, sometimes people will go for that like turns 2 or 3 and just push everything out of their deployment zone way too early, and just giving a really easy chance for your opponent to come in and hit you. Like, that's I think really heavily before committing to that so early in the game.
Well, you saw in my example, I scored it in turn 4 because that was where I thought naturally my game is advancing, but it's a very slow advance with my gits. So don't burn it, don't rush them up too quickly. It was better off holding it for turn 4, turn 5, where there's less interaction, and it was already complementing my game style.
Yeah, exactly. On Invaders, like, I will always hold it into like as late into the game as possible. Like, yeah, sure, if turn 3 or 4 I've got nothing else on, I'll do it. But like turn 5, like if it's a close game and you're trying to scrape like the odd point here or there, if you've just got a nailed on battle tactic that you can do and then focus on scoring 1-2 more and scoring or denying a grand strategy, then that's just perfect.
It's like the old Desecrate Their Lands, if you remember that one. Just like have a terrain feature and sit on it. Like that was a good example in turn 1 if you had nothing, but more importantly, turn 4 or turn 5 when there was very little left, Desecrate Their Lands was perfect.
Yeah.
Oh man, I missed that one. Have a terrain feature. I miss it. Like, I missed that one. That was such a good one.
Yeah. I think it's worth mentioning actually, because we've talked about the old tactics a few times. I think planning's more important this GHB with the tactics being harder. Like in the old GHBs, you could kind of get away with just like, make it, especially that first GHB, like you could just, make it up as you went along and you'd be fine. Whereas now with things being harder, needing to line more things up, that planning just gets a bit more important.
Talking about this General's Handbook as well, one of the benefits to this planning is that this is a 12-month season. So unlike the previous where it was 6 months, and by the time you learned what was working for your army, half the battle tactics had changed. Remember, there was like 4 that were set, 4 that would rotate. You've now got a good base. So everything you work on is going to serve you well until like June, July next year. So putting the reps in will just, you'll get a lot of value from this planning and thought process.
For sure.
Tweaked Synth asking, no, we skipped that one. That we already answered that one. So Skaven Spawn saying, how do you plan for your battle tactics in game? How much do your list dictate the battle tank scoring? What do you think is important? Look, I think we've kind of gone through a lot of this, and it's going to come down to how we think about our list, what our army is going to be. We've talked about the value of having thoughts around battle tactics in your list construction. And also each battle plan, varies so much, especially around the way you score an objective, with the zones, and if there's no man's land or if it's a straight area. Mojo Hamster asking though, how do you come back from behind if you score a battle tactic? Do you just focus on winning on the primaries and denying your opponent's battle tactics? The answer I think is, if you have the chance of denying your opponent's battle tactics, you level the playing field. but just keeping focus and not having the pressure on you. I think I've just seen too many people freak out when they lose a battle tactic, and then they get too risky, and it was backfires. It backfires exponentially.
Yeah, totally. I think everybody makes mistakes. Even the best players in the world, they make mistakes. They make smaller mistakes than everybody else. But like, if you can just be patient, do everything well, there'll be an opening. Like, it's you dropping a battle tactic isn't game. Like, there'll be other options.
And more than that, like, it's a dice game. The amount of times where a redeploy is hit a 6 and it's made a charge impossible. Actually, there's a good example. There's another good example I see often. People will advance their models up the board to make a charge easier, when actually they were like, I don't know, 5 or 6 inches, where if they just sat there and rolled the likelihood with a re-roll, they would have hit the charge without the movement and not triggered the redeploy. So, but sometimes dice are dice. You roll the miscast. Statistically, rolling double 1 on 2d6 is pretty low, but it happens. Rolling a 6 on a redeploy, it happens. So sometimes that's just how the cookie crumbles. You just got to adapt and just keep working through. Don't freak out.
Exactly. Yeah. Don't get triggered by dice. Like, dice are dice. Like, just focus on what you're doing. Yeah. Don't watch the dice and be like, oh, they're against me today. Like, just try and do your thing.
I think it's also anticipating the expectation. Like, the amount of people I see trying to deep strike and then try to hit a 9-inch charge. Like, you look at the die statistically, the probability is like 25%. But most people go, yeah, I can hit a 9-inch charge. Even with a re-roll, it still works out to be 50%. And they're like, oh, well, I just failed my battle tactic. Well, what if you took 2 of those units and you increase those odds? Are there other units that might have a +1 to your charge? Is there other things you can do to, again, reduce the risk?
Yeah, exactly. The less you have to rely on dice, the better. So anything you can do to just make the game happen how you want it to happen, not being reliant on dice, is super good.
The last 2 questions is, how viable is denying battle tactics when your opponent has an army book full of good ones?
No, that's where it comes down to mistakes. Like, you don't plan for that. You just if they go for a tactic and you see a way of stopping it, then you go for it. But in terms of in the planning, no, you just focus on doing your thing and holding them off on objectives and that kind of thing.
Agreed. Control what you can control. If you just get their rules out and you're looking at every different situation and how do I stop this from happening, you're just going to stretch yourself too thin, and you're going to lose focus on controlling objectives, and your opponent's going to pick you apart. Like, I think there's a point where you just got to let it happen. If the situation occurs where you can rally, you can shut them down through various in-game mechanics, great, do it. But I wouldn't build a whole strategy around it, and control only so much.
Exactly.
Final one from Manfred would be, when can or should you stop caring about beating your opponents in battle and focus on points?
I mean, by that, does he mean if you've lost and you're just trying to score as many points as possible?
I think obviously I can't paraphrase what the question is, but I think that's a good example, right? Is when you realize that the game is lost, clawing as many battle tactics, trying to deny your opponent their grand strategy, can be your victory condition. Yeah, you can't win the game, but you now have a new objective, and that is stop your opponent from, be super spiteful and go for if they're like a spellcasting savant, like put everything and try to go kill that wizard. If it's like, have, models in each quadrant and don't have unit on X, just like spread your army out, spend points on rally, just try to like deny that grand strategy, deny the remaining battle tactics and score as many as you can. There is that point where controlling objectives is well and truly lost.
Yeah, totally. And that's where you're trying to abuse the fact that it's a dice game by getting the dice to spike massively your way. But ultimately, like, especially in a tournament environment, like, points do matter. Like normally in the UK anyway, we use differential. So like every point that you can deny of your opponents and every point of yours you can score will affect potentially where you're going to end up in the final standings. So yeah, in terms of when, it's hard to know, but I guess when you know that you're maybe 5, maybe more than that points behind and at the mid game, and you don't see any way you loosening the stranglehold, you're like, right, I'm just going to play for points now and do whatever I can.
It is funny though. I do see a few people. It's happened plenty of times. I'm sure it's happened to you as well, where the person has been self-defeated in like turn 2 or turn 3, and they almost want to concede. And you're like, no, let's play this out. Like, you're actually not as bad as you think it is. And the game is closer at the end than they realize. Like, oh yeah, no, I actually wasn't so bad. Sometimes we live in our own heads and we think the game is over. We're actually, again, having the mindset of just fighting for every point, doing the best you can. And you know what? If you think you've lost the game, you got nothing to lose. So why not just play it out?
Yeah, you'll still learn, exactly. I've got a few guys that I play with quite a lot, and Gareth, who's one of your Patreons, play with him a lot, and he was awful for it. We'd get to like turn 2 and he'd just be like, I've lost, haven't I? I was like, what are you talking about? No, play on. Because worst case scenario, you learn stuff about your army, or actually it's not as bad as you think.
Yeah, there's been plenty of times where it's not as bad as you think. And again, going back to list construction, what can I do? What can I do that's not interactive with my opponent? We talked intimidate, we talked magical dominance. There's a bunch of things, but thinking about what are my tactics and what can I add into my list that could score me should I find myself in an unwinnable situation.
Exactly, and like play to your outs. Like I had a really funny game against Khorne last week, and I basically tabled my opponent turn 3, and he summoned a Boomthirster, made the 9-inch charge, and then got 3 booms on the Boomthirster wound roll, and then rolled like 2 6s on his damage, and did like 40 damage to my army in a single turn or something mad like that. Like it wasn't enough, but it's like he played to his outs, like, and sometimes it breaks for you. And like that was like he had 1 model left at the start of his turn 3. He had a hero he could summon off of. Like, mad things happen in this game.
Yeah, and it is a dice game, and that's why you're never truly out, and play it out as much as you can. But I think we've given everyone enough. I think we could talk a lot. We want to talk 2 hours. Holy shite. That's a lot. And like, I think, to summarize maybe what we've talked about here, a lot of this stuff is already in your head. There's this unconscious competence and there's conscious competence. It's about being deliberate with what you do. You probably already know what you need to do. It's just sitting down, putting it into practice, discussing it. Obviously, Tubbs and I are both in my Discord, Surprise the Century. You've got these communities where you can say, hey, I'm really struggling with my turn 1 or my turn 5, or when I'm in a particular battle plan, I'm in the ice fields, I don't know how to score in turn 3, or I'm having challenges when I'm against a particular army. Really having conversations and finding out what other people's flows are. Hell, get people to send you their Goonhammer map around, what their sequence was. You could start early, borrowing from other people and getting an idea of why they do what they do. So if you're early in your process, leverage others. If you are someone who's been playing for a while and you're looking to improve, to score more than 2 or 3, sit down and become more deliberate against your opposition, your battle plans, or at least construction.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and just start at the very basic level. Understanding when's best to score what battle tactics, and having a plan for that. Then you can go into list building and figure out how your list affects what tactics you could score. Then you can go into battle plans, and then you can go into looking at actually your opponents and what tactics of theirs you might be able to deny. But all of that requires time and wanting to do that. And so wherever you fall on that scale is super fine.
Cool. Any final comments or thoughts, or we'll wrap this up?
No, I don't think so.
It's a lot of discussion on battle tactics, something that is just inherently in the game. And when you sit down and get really deliberate, you can talk for 2 hours about battle tactics as a topic. God, I wonder how long a grand strategy topic will be for. Like 10 minutes. That's probably a really quick one.
take spellcasting savant and succeed. Yeah.
Yeah, and just don't leave your wizard open for Kato to come destroy it like I did. I just sat there like, oh, my Fungoid Cave Shaman can't be targeted outside of 12. Yeah, Flying Kato just come and like stabbed him in the face. And I'm like, oh, why don't I do
For
that?
sure.
Tubbs, where can people find you if they want to talk more about Age of Sigmar, maybe, Big War, battle tactics? Like, I know you're clearly in my Discord. Anywhere else on the socials?
Yeah, I am on Twitter. I need to find out. Alex Tubb 7 on Twitter. Or in Coach's Discord, I'm generally potting around in there.
Yeah, occasionally.
Yeah,
more than that, mate. This has been awesome. Thank you so much. I hope everyone enjoyed the discussion. It's a little different. If you did, please let us know. Like, comment. You know the dealio. If you find value in the masterclass series and there are other masterclasses you like, so far we've done one on deployment. This is one on battle tactics. If there are other topics that you really need help unpacking or you think is worth value of a video that's not grand strategies, we're not doing one on grand strats, but if there's something in there in the series that you think is valuable, do leave it in the comment section and let me know. We're always curious to hear what you would love to hear more about and how it can add value to your journey of becoming a great player. But Alex, thank you so much for your time. Everyone, I hope you enjoyed it. Again, like, subscribe, you know the dealio here. And until next time, score 5 out of 5 battle tactics and don't run a proper miscast when you are trying to do a spellcasting one.
Just roll 6s.
Just roll nothing but 6s. It's I still dice there. No, they're not cocked, I swear. All right. See you guys. Thanks everyone. Bye.
Thanks for hanging around until the end. I hope you enjoyed that video and you walked away with a few new ideas. Now, if you did, I would love it if you pressed like on the video, as well as left me a comment with your thoughts. The conversation will continue over on Discord, and the link is down below in the episode description. I also want to give a massive shout out to the AOS Coach patrons and YouTube members who are supporting the channel and the growth that you're seeing here. So cheers, you are all bloody legends. And until next time, don't roll a double 1 on a spellcast.